Calamari Salutations everyone! Thanks for checking out the video. Power Rankings Week 1 here, and once again I'm joined by my good buddy SouthSideBraves. How you doing?
I'm doing good, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here too. This was a really fun week doing Power Rankings. I think the main question we asked when doing the Power Rankings was, which team would we rather face? And sometimes just to organize teams in terms of strength, we would just ask that question and see what was the team that we preferred to try and face. And that team was probably the lower of those two, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we can now join on our first two teams. I know the name of the 16th team is a little bit off, but we had a coach unfortunately dropping out of the league, but we have already found a replacement. It's Arts. You may know him from other leagues that he's been in, and I've already faced him on this channel. And he had the Lake of Rage Gyarados at the time, but he will be known as the Rustboro CT Rejects for this season. So looking forward to see how Arts will fare against the rest of the league. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the pleasure of playing with him in another league as well. He's a coach that's going to take it seriously, try to go pick up some wins, and probably do a little bit of trash talking on the way, along the way in a very friendly way. But he's always a blast to play. I think he'll be a great asset to the league.
Yeah, but that kind of trash talk is always funny.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so the other team that was supposed to face them, the 6th Street Viper, hasn't really had a match yet, so we didn't feel comfortable ranking them yet. But I think that will change for week 2 because I've already seen they've already played their match. So without further ado, let's start with the last team on the list, and it's the Hustle Gods. And when we talk about the Hustle Gods, there's some weaknesses on their team that were exposed, mainly by a certain Pokemon that may be or maybe not an E-tier pick. I don't know. When I watched the match with the Hustle Gods, I didn't catch a glimpse of a game plan. Usually when you go into a match, you have a certain win condition that you want to play to and want to position correctly. And I felt like the Hustle Gods were just going with the flow, trying to respond to what the enemy was doing, rather than trying to set up their own plan. And of course that ended up crashing spectacularly, and also some plays didn't make sense to me. There was some dubious doubles that were made that didn't actually gain him momentum on the match, and ultimately the match ended up in a loss, and it wasn't by a close margin, and it didn't even look close at a single point of the game.
Yeah, very much just going off what you said. Wasn't real close, and if you watch the video from the side of the Hustle Gods, which I do think I watched this one from both coaches' perspectives, but if you watch from him, I think he kind of sums up how the match is going to go in the first 2 minutes of his video, where he talks about said Pokemon, and he talks about his lack of prep for it. And I know I also watched his exhibition video where he talks about how important prep is, and I think he's learned his lesson from week 1 about how much he needs to prep for all Mons on his opponent's team. So hopefully he's learned that, and we'll see a better showing in week 2 from him.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully he learned that lesson by now.
Yep.
Moving on to the 13th place, we have the Calexico Blaicans, who dropped 4 places this week.
Yeah, and this is unfortunately the commissioner's team, Coach Sen. And I think we know kind of how this went. He tried to make a play that probably was not the optimal play to make, and unfortunately couldn't bounce back from it, kind of letting a Pokemon get set up and really run rampant on his team. Like I said, it was just the lack of being able to bounce back from that mistake early in the match. And like I said, it was not much to go off of that match after that. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to
Yeah,
What could be said?
sometimes in a match you make small mistakes that you can bounce back from, and sometimes you just make a glaring mistake that just doesn't let you recover from the match at all. And we had another coach that happened to, and we'll talk about that coach later. But the thing is, when this glaring mistake happened, Sen didn't manage to recover mentally from it, and it sure affected his plays going forward in the match, where the decisions he was making were not the most optimal, and they were just a result of that single mistake still haunting him throughout that match. So there's a certain tilt-proof factor that coaches need to have, and Sen just didn't display that this week. That's why we bumped him down so much. Of course, we know he's a terrific coach and a very good battler, and we also know that he's capable of having that tilt-proof factor because he's used it already to win leagues before. Since we're just basing off week ones, we just don't have much more to go with.
Yeah, you said it perfectly there. It's just off week one. We know and expect him to bounce back from this game and have much better showings in the future.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of coaches who will have a better showing in the future, we hope, is the Immunity Idols. So they had a glaring weakness on their team, which is electric, and the opponent managed to exploit that to perfection. And I just wasn't a fan of the way the Mandibuzz was utilized, because every time it hit the field, it just was a free switch to the Electivire and lost this team so much momentum that ultimately it fell behind early game and couldn't finish off with the Spectrier. Speaking of Spectrier, I can see the idea behind the Hex set. I don't know if it was the best idea. I feel like in first weeks coaches usually want to run more regular things on Pokemon they aren't as familiar with, and then once they get familiarized with the Pokemon, start experimenting a little bit. This might have been one of such cases. Maybe just running a simple Choice Specs or Choice Scarfs set on the Spectrier would have made it much better to utilize, and eventually try to net a better differential or even the win.
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of covered it. Going back to that Spectrier set, I saw the idea of it in, I don't know if we said it, this was my opponent week one. I went up against Mount and the Immunity Idols.
Yeah.
But I saw the idea of it because my team was so, and I guess still is, so heavy on physical attackers. So I thought the Will-O-Wisp Hex, the idea of it there, Will-O-Wisp more for my physical attackers, and you get the Hex damage. But like you said, I don't think it worked as well in practice as it did in theory. And also you covered the Mandibuzz. I thought I was able to kind of take advantage of that Mandibuzz with my Electivire. But you also said at the very beginning, this is another coach that we have seen very, very great things from. This is just going off 1 week, and I fully expect him to bounce back. I know he actually mentioned to me that I might have sparked some extra motivation in him. So if that's the case, I apologize to the teams he plays in the next few weeks.
Looking forward to that. And at the 11th spot, we have the Andor Teddyurus, and go ahead.
Yeah, so next up we have the Teddyurus, and you hinted at them earlier. A coach that made a mistake early on, but kind of being able to bounce back from it. He was one that very early in the game, turn 1, I believe,
yes,
lost one of his most important Mons in his Latios.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, losing Latios that early was huge for his team, and it was really, really tough to come back from. But in the second half of the game, after he made that mistake, I actually thought he played very well and near perfect to try to come back from it. It was just unfortunate, too big of a loss too early, so he couldn't come all the way back. But like I said, after that, with what he had left, I thought he made almost every right play down the stretch. He didn't have enough resources left in the tank to get the job done and turn it around.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't put it any other way. It's just the coaches were basically playing at a similar level, but when both coaches play at a similar level, If one has more resources and the other has less resources, guess who wins?
I'm going to go with the one with more resources.
Yes, exactly. So that's unfortunately what happened to the Teddyurses, but one thing I would like to mention is that scouting is important, and sometimes people will try to, if you can say that, cheese you in turn 1 to try to net them some type of advantage, and most of the times it's better to play it safe rather than just going ham. Most of the times. The beauty in being a great coach is knowing when to go for it and knowing when not to go for it. So as a general rule of thumb and general learning tool, better to scout than to just drop a Draco. So we'll move on to the 10th place, and in the 10th place we have the biggest fall of the week, and it was the Philadelphia Melmetals. About the Melmetals, we had said that this was the best roster in the league, but the thing is their play just didn't match their roster this week. Cherry said it best in his own video where he wasn't really happy with this play and he was a little bit nervous when playing. That kind of showed up because some decisions that he made weren't making that much sense. Although credit where credit is due, the Tapu Fini set was really good in theory, but there were two things that made it not work out this week. The first one, and probably the most important one, was that he didn't utilize it late game as it was intended to, because that Tapu Fini set was intended to function as a late game sweeper, and when it's set on the field, first it took way too much damage from that Fire Blast, and second, the opponent still had the reason number 2 this thing didn't work was the Rosalia. The opponent still had the Rosalia on their side of the field, and Rosalia just had both stabs to hit the Tapu Fini. Even if the Rosalia didn't 1v1 the Tapu Fini at that point, the Zarude could just come in freely and do nasty things to it. So at that point, Tapu Fini was just dead weight. Another thing for this coach is the Claydol. I get the Claydol teleporting. I think that's very good to utilize, but the teleports that you switched into, like Claydol, like Ferrothorn, they weren't just netting momentum for you on the match. I would have been more of a fan if you went into, I don't know, maybe Blaziken and start close combating some things, something like that, because switching in Frostlass, switching in Ferrothorn, the opponent just had really good switch-ins to that, really good answers, and eventually you didn't gain momentum from the momentum you used in the match.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you kind of covered it perfectly. Fantastic roster, so I don't foresee this coach going to a big losing streak or anything, because again, he has the perfect mons to get out of it and bounce back from this week 1. But you covered 2 of his biggest flaws in my eyes as well. The Tapu Fini set I thought was really good if Rosalia wasn't there. If that Rosalia wasn't on the other side, that Tapu Fini set could have worked really, really well. So once he saw that Rosalia, probably should have adjusted and maybe gone a different route and not tried to still force it to work. And the Claydol, I just thought the thought of using Claydol to gain momentum in the match was there, just didn't execute it quite as strongly as he could have. So for those reasons, like I said, that's why we see him fall 9 spots. But again, great roster, can very easily bounce back next week.
Moving on, in number 9 we have the 3 Electrons.
All right, yeah, so looking at this team, the 3 Electrons, first thing I want to just throw out there is I loved their use of Pikachu. Pikachu was phenomenal in my eyes. I loved seeing that thing in a draft league, actually on the field picking up kills. But this was a team that, I believe the only team, correct me if I'm wrong, the only team in the league that drafted 2 S+ Mons.
Yes.
So if you're going to draft 2 S+ Mons, they got to perform. And unfortunately, his most successful Pokemon of the week was Pikachu in neither of his S+ Mons. So if that's the case, that's probably not going to result in many wins. His Como he used okay. It didn't work out as well as he intended it to. Unfortunately, he used to Slowbro as well. Getting 2-hit KO'd was rough for him and kind of put him on the back foot for a lot of this match. But like I said, it came down to if you're going to draft 2S plus Mons, in my eyes, they got to perform. And unfortunately, especially the Landorus, it just did not.
It broke my heart when the Landorus just entered the field just to die.
Yep, that one hurt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so style points for utilizing Pikachu. The amount of damage that thing does is insane, and you definitely don't expect that with the Light Ball. But yeah, you also covered the Slowbro. Maybe, I've already discussed this with you, but maybe preserving the Slowbro would have been a much better play to have a physical wall to check something later down the line. Maybe going into the Cinderace would have been the play, because I've calced it, and Icicle Crash never killed the Cinderace, even being banded. Yeah, maybe just an unfortunate turn of events early game. Ended up with you sacking more mons than you should, and ultimately Bishmi just capitalized on that. And speaking of Bishmi, he actually comes up at number 8, the Trash Town Thieves. And the best thing I can do to sum up Bishmi's strats this week is just this one sentence. If you don't know what you're doing, then how could your opponents know? And that's exactly what Bishmi did this week. So they just made a random spread on the Darmanitan and allowed it to survive the Drain Punch from the Como. And then later down the line, Bishmi also positioned the Rapidash perfectly on the field. And Rapidash and Darmanitan applied so much pressure on Sven's team that eventually he just had to start sacking mons left and right, and just ran out of gas. So props to Bishmi for positioning his offensive threats really nicely. And I also really like to see the Palm Tree KOing the Slurpuff with just the Leaf Storm. It was kind of satisfying, guys, I think. And yeah, so Bishmi just made the plays this week. They worked, and nothing to say.
Yeah, I mean, the one mon I really wanted to cover on his team, you kind of already hinted at, was that Glaring Rapidash. I thought performed very well. And honestly, I think it performed better than Bishmi expected it to. I think he got more use out of that than he thought he would.
Yeah, I got that notion too. Yeah.
Yep. So I just wanted to highlight that one mon, but he kind of covered the rest of it. And like I said, good plays in the match. Sees Bishmi pick up with the week 1 win.
So we're going to move on now into the Brisbane Rillaboomers, who actually maintained their spot.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the Rillaboomers' opponent and kind of that turn 1 not scouting entirely properly. And this is the team that took advantage of that. And honestly, their Zygarde set was phenomenal, especially once he got it set up with his 2 opponents' walls both being poisoned. And if he brings, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he said in his video they brought the wrong set. If he brings the right one, he might just sweep with Zygarde at that point.
But if he has the extreme speed, he doesn't have the ability to lower the special attack on the Clefairy.
That's fair. Yeah. So either way, I thought he played the Zygarde set he brought very well. And you mentioned that match, more than any other, looked like it was in 2 halves. Half 1 was before the Zygarde died, and half 1, this coach was kind of dominating the match. And then in half 2, after Zygarde died, kind of turned into a little bit of a stally, make your right moves, predict with the toxic or with the poison on Pokemon and that, and who could wear the other one out first. He had more resources to deal with. I thought that part of the game, that second half especially, was played very well by both coaches, and he was able to out-survive his opponent at that point in the match.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, the second part of this match was more of a chess battle, with both coaches trying to make the right plays, and eventually the Rillaboomers just had more gas in the tank, and they netted the win for their team. So now we're going to move on to a losing coach, but like we said on the beginning of the video, seeing these 3 coaches, we felt like the Cerulean City Mewtwo was actually the one we'd rather face the least, and that has to do with 2 things. The first one is the quality of the match that they lost was really high, with both coaches of that match making really good plays and positioning their mons to almost perfection. And the second reason is that Mew set. And that Mew set was pure genius, pure brilliance. I've highlighted it on the weekly Mercargo video of the clean sweep I did. And it was brilliant. I loved it. It was so amazing. And it serves as a message. And the message is, this Mew will run whatever I want. And you won't know what's coming. And on a team with Mew, that tool is the best tool to have, because most of the coaches, I'd say, will use Mew in a rather predictable way. And the way that Luke Harry used the Mew on this week just shouted out to the world, yo, I am a brilliant prepper and I know how to utilize Mew and you should be afraid of it. And honestly, that's what makes Mew one of the most terrifying picks on Draft League. And it's in their arsenal, it's in the arsenal of this team. And be scared, be very scared.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you kind of covered the main points. That Mew, you said it yourself. So a lot of teams, when they draft Mew in draft leagues, the theory is that it's so unpredictable, so many different things it can do, and that's why it's so good. But most coaches don't end up using it that way. You still see the same set of moves or the same pool of moves come week in, week out. But week one, seeing what set he brought, what moves he had on it, does show you that you can't predict his Mew. His Mew will have crazy things on it, and he'll make it work. So that is a big reason why this coach is very scary to prep for, is just because what we saw in 1 week with the Mew. And you also mentioned it, of all the losing coaches, his play was very high level. This match as a whole was very high level of play. It was unfortunate for the disconnects. I know they had to go to showdown for it. That always sucks. But that didn't take away from the play of the game. They played fantastic. And so I thought by far this needs to be the highest ranked of all the losing coaches. So, I mean, that's why we still see him as high as this even after the loss. And his opponent was already highly ranked before that as well. So, I mean, it was two high-level coaches in a very nail-biter game.
Yes, exactly. So why did this coach lose the match? It was probably one single turn where they clicked light screen instead of sticky web. He knows it, we know it, and he'll be basically chastising all over that turn for a very long time. But we know that Luke Harry can do the plays, and his next opponents should be scared of him because he's still a phenomenal player.
Absolutely.
So now we're going to move on to the Hellblaze Volcaronis.
Yeah, and honestly, of all the coaches, this one probably has the least to talk about, in all honesty. They brought the double set that ended up winning them the match. Their opponent, again, made the one misplay that kind of let double run crazy. And that's pretty much what we saw from him. So, again, huge win, but not much to actually analyze or break down from the match as a whole. So that's why he kind of stays put at number 5. And like I said, that double was definitely his player of the week and led to that big win.
Yeah, the thing about sweeps for whoever is analyzing is that there's probably not much play involved for us to analyze, and that's either good because we can't bump you down because of misplays, but that's also not good because there's not that many good plays that we can bump the people up from. So there's really not much to say about Lucas this week. He stays at number 5. The only reason he stays at number 5 it's because some coaches that were below him showed more this week than Lucas, because they had to show more this week. And one of those coaches is actually my co-host for this segment. The Nashville Needle Kings sit at number 4. And the main reason for that is probably that Electivire denting holes on the enemy team early game. And not only that, but they had to use some predictions to do that. And they were the right call to make. Flamethrower hitting the Ferroseed was just beauty. It was a really predictable play. But sometimes predictable plays become so predictable that they aren't predictable. But being able to read your opponent is what makes a really great coach. And on that turn, SouthSideBraves was a great coach and predicted that Pharaoh Seed beautifully. And after that Pharaoh Seed went down, the Electivire just applied so much pressure that eventually the Azo went to the field, and Azo just started killing stuff left and right, and Mountade just didn't have an answer for it.
Yeah, I don't want to sit here and talk about my own team very much, but you kind of covered it. My idea was to get Electivire in on Mandibuzz as often as I could. That kind of worked, led to some kills, especially once that Pharaoh Seed was gone. And then at the end, Azumarill was able to clean up. And yeah, I was able to avoid that Spectre killing me too much. That was my biggest worry going into it. I felt like I was able to avoid it to the best of my ability.
The spooky horse.
Yep.
All right, so at number 3, we have the Miami Heatmor.
Yeah, so the Heatmor this week played exceptionally well. Really solid prep going into the match as well. And then also a decent, you talked about predictions earlier, a decent prediction with the Chandelure led the way for Sirfetch'd to be able to clean up late. And one of his better mons, the Garchomp, didn't even need to see the field in this one. Again, going up with a coach that has admitted how nervous they were going into it. But this coach did a good job of taking advantage of that. The mistakes and the hesitantness of some of their plays, this coach made sure they paid for it. So they picked up a big win, played very well in doing so, and that sees them climb to the top 3.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Aldra's play. I didn't know him at all. And if someone showed me this game and told me that's how Aldra plays, I'd probably given him more credit. He played really well. The prep was on point. Basically, every special part of the prep he did came into plan. The protective pads on the Zarude, the Wakan Berry on the Primarina, they all came clutch in the match, and basically he was so ahead in the match that he didn't have to utilize his biggest threat. So moving on into number 2, we have the winning part of the match of the week, which is the Sydney 6 and Sidon. This coach did some really solid plays to try and snag a really close win on the match of the week. It was just a 1-0. We talked earlier about tilt-proof factor, and the Sydney 6 showed their tilt-proof factor on this match. They had their Vaporeon just basically stole from them with nothing they could do, and when that happens, two things, coaches may react in one of two things. They just stay calm and try to make the plays they can and should make at that point, or they just tilt and start making random plays. And the Sydney 6 was the first one, so they showed up to the occasion, recognized that their weak addition from that point, from the point they had their Tapu Lele poisoned, was the Celebi, so they just positioned the Celebi perfectly. Late game rocks were the best decision that you could have made, because late game rocks were actually what chipped down the Dracovish enough so that the Celebi could kill it, and without them you would have lost that turn. So making all the right decisions even after adversity hits you netted you the win, and honestly there's not much more we can say. Tilt proof is huge.
Yeah, and you talk about that tilt proof. My favorite part about it is a lot of times in a match, if you make a misplay, like say comparing it to one of the games we talked about earlier with the Latios, you make one mistake and then something dies and game continues. This one, it wasn't even necessarily a mistake. It was a great prep on the Mew on the other side, but it wasn't just one turn, bounce back, let's see what we can do. You had to sit there and watch that Vaporeon turn after turn of Toxic until it died. So he had a long time to watch this happen and kind of figure out, all right, instead of just sulking about it, it's like, crazy Mew set, I just lose him on for nothing. He thought, okay, how do I bounce back from this? Where do I go next? And he realized from that point on, or maybe even before that, but definitely from that point, that Celebi still wins this match. If I keep Celebi healthy and make sure it outspeeds, Celebi wins this match. So that's where I need to go from here. So he took that time of watching that Vaporeon slowly poison to death and he used it very productively and came out of it with a game plan that led to that match of the week win.
So at number 1, to nobody's surprise, I think we have the Austin Taurus.
Yeah, so they're at number 1. They were number 2 last week, and obviously if the number 1 team loses, number 2 is kind of your first instinct of who should be number 1. But not just for that reason, he also played very well. Used a 20-point mon to dominate an entire team in the way he used Pincer. Hopefully from this point on, the rest of the coaches in this league will not underestimate the power that Pincer can have, because it was a very solid performance. And like I said, his team is extremely scared. We ranked his roster number 2 in the league even before watching him play. And then he dominates with a 20-point mon. So he didn't even use his powerhouses that we talked about when ranking his team. He uses bottom of the barrel and still dominates. So, I mean, for that reason, I don't see any reason that anyone else should be number 1. And I thought it was as clear as could be that he needs to be the number 1 team on these power rankings.
Yeah, it was the most solid performance of the week, and this match wasn't ever close from turn 1. He started with the rocks, but then just started chipping down that Mawile, and the opponent just realized, oh wait, I can't deal with this Pincer with this mon, I have to go into Urshifu. Urshifu just died because he clicked close combat, and it was just a beauty to watch that Pincer being played. It was beautiful. Yeah,
absolutely. Pincer just dominated.
So this concludes the power rankings for this week, week 1. A little bit shorter than last week. We just had less to cover because we weren't going by the full rosters. So anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I think week 1 was exciting. I loved watching the matches. Hopefully we continue with the quality content and solid matches the rest of the way.
Yeah, looking forward for the matches for week 2. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and go and subscribe to all the coaches on the YCL, including SouthSideBraves, my buddy.
Thank you.
So, Squid and SouthSideBraves jetting out.